Welcome to another real-world SF50 flying video. This one is titled, How to Have a Great SF50 Training Experience. In my 50-year professional flying career, I took well over 100 check rides for my licenses, type ratings, Part 135 check rides, and Part 121 proficiency and training checks. Let me share some of my thoughts on how to have a great SF50 training experience. Hello, I'm David Weeks. I've been flying professionally for over 50 years, starting as a CFI, then as a charter pilot in Light Twins. I spent time as an air ambulance pilot in Swansea Metro and worked as a demonstration pilot for the Learjet factory. I had a 35-year airline career, flying the 737-200 and 300, the A320 series, and I retired as a Boeing 787 captain. I'm also a current CFII. Now, there may be other YouTube channels that have glitzier production values than this one. I like to spend my time writing and teaching about the SF50, not doing post-production work. So just imagine this video is like a hangar chat session between friends. Let me be clear that this video is not flight instruction. The Cirrus SF50 airplane flight manual is always controlled. Many new SF50 owners are first-time jet trainees. Most have families and full-time jobs. Now, they probably have not been through a type rating course nor flown a full-motion Level D simulator before. Or they have the type rating and are back for their first FAR 6158 proficiency run, but they may only have 100 hours or so on the little jet. This is a perfect recipe for anxiety and nervousness, and that can really mess up your SF50 training experience. For professional pilots, ground schools, simulator flying, and check rides are a fundamental part of the job. For non-pros, it can be a bit unnerving if you've never been to training like Cirrus provides for the Vision Jet. Let's look at the ground school aspect of training first. When you finally own your SF50, you'll get a slot for training. Cirrus will send you a big packet of manuals and other information regarding the training process. Imagine this package to be full of Christmas presents. So open everything up to see what goodies you just got. Let's talk about when to start studying. Studying in advance is a must. I'm here to tell you that while the ground school course is comprehensive, you absolutely have to study hard before you show up for day one. In my opinion, if you don't, you'll fail. It's as simple as that. Training may be more than a month away, so you may not have to jump into the books immediately. My recommendation is to start studying about a month in advance. Now, why so far ahead? As I mentioned, the SF50 is overwhelmingly flown by owner pilots. To be able to afford the little jet, they're successful, and that means they have significant demands on their time. For many, it'll be easier to carve out an hour or so a day for a month rather than wait until they're 10 days out from class and try and free up several hours every day. If something crops up to steal that study time, it can be too late to comfortably make it up. To learn the airplane and how to fly it, the three primary documents you'll be working with are the Pilot's Information Manual, or PIM, the Airplane Flight Manual, or AFM, and the Vision Jet Maneuvers Guide. Cirrus sent me bound paper copies of the PIM and AFM and the Maneuvers Guide, but you can easily download PDFs of all three from the Cirrus website. I find that I prefer paper books when spending time reading through sections. I prefer the PDFs when I need to look up specific facts. Searching a PDF is much easier than flipping through pages in a book, saying to yourself, I know I saw it here somewhere. Now, one other book that I highly recommend is Max Trescott's G3000, G5000 Glass Cockpit Handbook. I am not getting paid to endorse this book, but I can vouch that it was a key asset for my initial training going well. Now, if you've been flying the G2000 avionics and the G7 model of the SR-22, you won't really need it. But if you've been flying the Garmin G1000, this book is going to make learning the G3000 much easier. And if you've never flown Garmin before, you'll be lost without it, in my opinion. Buy a copy, add it to your list of books to read before you start training. Cirrus does have G3000 trainings in the schoolhouse, but that means spending time there after class is over. It's a lot easier to come to class being familiar with the G3000 buttonology after reading Trescott's book. Now, everybody's brain works differently, but here's how I went through the PIM and AFM. For the PIM, I first went through it over a couple of days from front to back. I wasn't skimming, but I wasn't trying to memorize every bit of systems knowledge. And I did the same with the AFM. Get a feel for the material, how it's organized. Look at the big picture of how the systems work and interact with each other. Split your time between the PIM and the AFM each study session. Once you've gone through both books, look over the maneuvers guide and get a feel for how Cirrus wants you to fly the plane. You don't memorize it yet. The second pass of the PM is where I really try to learn the details. I use a highlighter to mark important passages. I also keep a list of questions that I'll be asking during ground school class at the appropriate time. I also keep a question list for the AFM too. Most of these are, why is it done like this? Questions. For me, checklists are easier to understand and perform if you learn why it's written the way it is. So keep that question list when you work your way through the AFM, especially the abnormal and emergency sections. Now, some things you just have to memorize. You need to know all the Section 2 aircraft limitations, the emergency procedures, and memory items. Strangely enough, checklist memory items are done from memory and then double-checked when using the electronic checklist. Having said that, I've never had anyone ask me about things like the actual numbers that correspond to, say, the oil pressure gauge or the actual fuel flow number at the top of the green arc on the fuel flow gauge. But know the speeds, weights, fuel types, quantities, engine temps, starting limits, starter duty cycle, when to abort an engine start, the in-flight restart envelope, airplane G limits, altitude limits, and so on. You may wish to prepare a list of the various limits and memory items for reference. And if in doubt, learn the number. Okay, so it's time to go to Knoxville for training. Me, I like staying at the airport Hilton, as the Cirrus Training Center is barely a 10-minute walk away. Now, some find it old and tired, and I won't argue that point. I just like not having to worry about driving from a nicer downtown hotel and dealing with traffic on the way to school. Now, your mileage may vary. The ground school curriculum will be given to you so you can prepare for each day's material. I looked over the next day's material the night before. I also went over my limitations and memory items each night to really burn them into my brain. Don't forget the question list you developed during book study. Ask your questions at the appropriate time. Now, if you're worried about learning the Garmin G3000, especially if you did not get the Trescott G3000 book, make sure you spend time on the G3000 trainer, or hot bench, as it's sometimes called. By the time you get to the sim, you need to be able to do the pre-flight setup, create a flight plan, do direct twos, and handle a reroute, and load approaches, SIDS and stars, as well as manage the nav and comm radios. At the end of the classroom sessions, there's a 100-question multiple choice test. Know your limitations and know the systems. Now, make sure you RTFQ, which is read the question, and don't jump to conclusions. The questions aren't hard, but many of them have sucker answers that sound good if you don't think about it. Now, with the written pass, the real fun starts. Many of the first sim sessions are flown in sim with visual but no motion. Further along, you switch to the full motion Level D simulator. And for those of you who have not flown a really good Level D sim, and this is one, you are in for a blast. We'll talk more about that in a bit. You should get the curriculum for each session ahead of time. Again, at this stage, preparation is critical. Without burning midnight oil, you need to chair fly the next day's sim session. Review the place for each airport, look at the airport diagram, the place for the SIDS and stars and approaches for the session. I use the highlighting feature in ForeFlight to circle important information like speeds on the star and the bottom altitudes. If there's a speed the SF50 cannot do, such as crossing an intersection at 270 knots, remind yourself that you need to tell the controller that as soon as practical. Spend time on the approach plates, and I circle the relevant minimum altitudes as well as the missed approach altitude. I don't try to memorize the plate, but I do want to be familiar with it and know that I've read the notes in the briefing strip. Each night, review the checklist memory items. You're going to be getting non-normal engine starts, aborted starts, engine failures, engine fires, and caps pulls a lot. So make sure you have those down cold. Now, the first time in the full motion sim, you may find it a bit disorienting when taxing. This happens to many people, and don't worry if you are one of them. The motion in the sim comes from the sim moving just enough to fool your inner ear into thinking that you are turning or climbing or whatever. But that's not the real thing, and what you see out the window when taxiing may not mesh with what your body is feeling. This odd sensation often goes away when you get used to it. Now, while Cirrus does teach us to do a departure briefing, one area that many non-professional pilots are not good at is briefing the taxi route. A thorough departure briefing includes discussing the taxi route to the runway, any runway crossings, and hotspots displayed on the taxi chart. Make sure you have the taxi chart displayed on the MFD or your iPad, and check the cleared taxi route before you begin your taxi. And please read Advisory Circular 9173 Bravo for more details. We all know that each sim session is crammed full of things that need to be accomplished. But you need to know that as the PIC, you determine when you are ready for the approach, especially when you have an approach briefing and an abnormal or emergency checklist to accomplish. Rushing is the primary reason that approaches get screwed up. And in my experience, pilots let themselves get rushed. They feel that with an engine fire, they have to do something right now. Not true. They feel they have to start the approach when cleared for the approach, even though they have not completed the approach briefing and checklist. Not true. New sim pilots need to remember that they control the pacing of the abnormal or emergency. The only problem where you need to do something immediately is to don your oxygen mask if you even suspect a problem with the cabin pressurization. Got an engine fire indication? Silence the oral warning by touching the flashing message button. Now, take a slow breath. First, and as always, fly the airplane. Then, methodically, begin the memory items for an engine fire indication. I talk out loud and I speak slowly. This keeps me from rushing. If you rush and lose your train of thought and grab the fire knowledge switch and turn it off out of sequence, you may just have killed an engine that only has a bleed leak. Did the gear fail extend when you lowered the gear handle and you're 1 dot below the glide slope when this happens? What do? Well, you do not do the alternate gear extension from memory. Here's one way to handle a problem like this without rushing. First, fly the airplane. Then you tell ATC that you have a gear problem and you need delay vectors while you deal with it, and you'll tell them when you are ready for the approach. Now, ATC may very well ask if you're declaring an emergency. I would not declare an emergency, but I would go pan, 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 pan. Pan, pan is an urgency signal in aviation and maritime communications. It indicates a situation that requires prompt attention, but is not a life-threatening emergency. It's used when there's an urgent problem that needs assistance, but does not pose immediate danger to life or the aircraft. Now, don't hand fly the airplane when running any abnormal or emergency checklists. Use the autopilot, assuming it's available. Now, once out of the immediate airport area, you can then do the alternate gear extension checklist. And when you have 3 green and the checklist is complete, only then should you tell ATC that you're ready for the approach. Just remember, you pulled the hydraulic pump circuit breaker and you will not be able to raise the gear if you have to go around. Now, if you do not get 3 green then I would tell ATC, Mayday, 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 and that you have unsafe landing gear. Now, dealing with that is a story for another podcast. The point of this is to reinforce the idea that you don't rush and don't let ATC rush you. Don't rush in the sim, don't rush in the airplane. One other way that pilots rush in the sim is flying too fast. This is especially true of more experienced SF50 pilots who are back for recurrent. They fly the sim the way they fly the airplane. And, well, that may not be the way that Cirrus wants it flown. The IFOM and Maneuvers Guide specifies speeds for each segment of an instrument approach. Generally speaking, Cirrus wants you at 140 on initial, and 120 on base with flaps 50%, and 95 or VREF plus 10 on final. Flying downwind at 180 and base at 140 with flaps up is not going to endear you to your instructor or examiner. A part of recurrent training is showing the instructor that you can fly the jet the way Cirrus wants it done. Doing the airline style, 250 knots to 20 miles out, then 210 to 10, then 170 to 5, is not how you fly a sim session or check ride. And more importantly, going too fast leaves you less time to monitor the approach. You're rushing. When doing lots of approaches in the Cirrus Sim, one after the other, I personally do not exceed 140 knots, period. There's no need to go faster. If the instructor wants to move you along, he can tell you he's repositioning the sim. The last full flight session is a mock type rating. While the airports and approaches may or may not be different for the ride, you're going to do everything that's required on the type ride. Expect 4 approaches, 2 precision, 2 non-precision. You hand fly one of each and use the autopilot for the other 2. Now, the main difference is that on the warm-up, you're still in training. If you screw up, you can stop and ask questions and you can repeat the maneuver. Generally speaking, on the type ride, you are not being trained. You are demonstrating you can fly the SF50 to ATP standards. We'll talk more about this later. Before the check ride day, the examiner will contact you. He'll ask you to flight plan a trip from somewhere to somewhere else. Take the time to do a thorough flight plan. If you've not watched my video, Plan Your Flight and Fly Your Plane, you should. If you show up with a flight plan of just the route, altitude, elapsed time, and fuel burn, you are not going to look good because you also need performance data, NOTAMs, detailed weather information. If you're a ForeFlight user, depending on your subscription level, ForeFlight will get pretty much everything you need except a weight and balance calculation and runway analysis. You need to have weight and balance and runway analysis done. Also, if there's a SID for the departure airport, check that you can meet all the climb grading requirements. I recommend using Vision ProFlight for performance and weight and balance, but if you don't use an app, then be prepared to do all the performance calculations from the AFM. When I was asked to show my flight planning, I walked the examiner through a very detailed pre-flight briefing. So I started off right, and that set a good tone for the rest of the session. You can expect the oral to last about an hour. I've already discussed the need to know all the limitations and systems and memory items. But many pilots get into trouble for one reason. When answering a straightforward question, they dig a hole for themselves and jump into it. One saying I learned early on is, if the examiner asks you what time it is, just tell him the time. Don't tell him how to build the watch. So answer the question and nothing more. If you don't know the answer, say so. Don't BS. If you start to wander into territory that you don't really know, the examiner is going to see that and he'll poke around to find out what you do and don't know. Now, in my oral, I made a few mistakes with questions on the electrical system, but I answered most of the questions correctly. The examiner discussed my errors in detail so that I understood it better afterwards. When you're done with the oral and climbed into the sim, it's comforting to say to yourself, I've already done Because if you hadn't, then you wouldn't have been recommended for the ride. Okay, let's talk about tolerances and limitations. Earlier, I mentioned that on a type rating ride, you can't just flunk a maneuver and then ask for a do-over. Actually, the FAA does not use the term flunk. The ATP Airman Certification Standards document uses the term unsatisfactory. Now, here are 3 reasons that you would receive an unsatisfactory on a maneuver. 1, consistently exceeding tolerances stated in the skill elements of the task. 2, failure to take prompt corrective action when tolerances are exceeded. And 3, failure to exercise risk management. Now, it's important to know that you can recognize out of tolerance performance and correct it on your own. Okay, say you roll into a steep turn, you let the nose drop, you lose 100 feet at altitude. If you recognize that and immediately correct, the examiner will see you notice the altitude loss and correct it. You were out of tolerance for the maneuver, but you self-corrected. On an ILS, you exceed 1/4 scale deflection on the localizer. You catch it right away and correct back. The examiner will see that you notice the course deviation and correct it. You were out of tolerance maneuver, but you self-corrected. In both cases, if you just motored on too low on the steep turn or half scale off on the localizer and did nothing about it, you'd get an unsatisfactory on the maneuver. Now, assuming you are not exceeding tolerances on every maneuver, most examiners will allow a couple of exceedances. The critical point is that you recognize and correct right away. Limitations are different. There is no tolerance for exceeding published limitations. You exceed VNO or try to extend the landing gear above the gear speed limit, that is exceeding a limitation and will almost certainly get you an unsatisfactory and have the check ride terminated. Poor judgment or poor risk management is harder to quantify but can be equally devastating. Let's say you're doing a non-precision approach and are slow to get down to the MDA. You pick up the runway visually, but you're high and close. So you chop the power, push the nose over, and land in the touchdown zone. But your rated descent was 1,400 feet per minute. Sure, you landed. 1,400 feet per minute down on a very short climb is not a stabilized approach. You just demonstrated bad judgment. You should have executed a missed approach, never even starting the descent from the MDA. While you screwed up the approach, when you did the missed approach, you demonstrated good judgment, and this will not cause a failure. Now, in the show notes, I'm going to include a truly excellent document that I found on the internet several years ago. I don't know who wrote it, but it's an outstanding summary of what the type rating ride itself will be like. So check it out. In summary, you're going to ace your type rating day or 6158 recurrent ride if you do the following. 1, come prepared. Study methodically and don't try to cram at the last minute. Constantly review limitations and memory items. 2, keep question lists and get answers during ground school. 3, buy the Max Prescott G3000 book if you're all uncertain about learning the G3000. And use the Hot Bench G3000 trainer as needed after class. 4, before each sim session, study the airport and all the approaches and share flying. 5, go slow. Keep your speed down when doing practice approaches. 6, don't rush yourself and don't let ATC rush you. Get the checklists and briefings done before starting the approach itself. 7, on the oral, don't tell the examiner how to build the watch. Just tell him the time. 8, don't assume you flunked if you exceed your tolerance as long as you catch it and correct back. And lastly, show good judgments. So I hope these comments and suggestions will make your SF50 initial or recurrent training a great experience. I'm David Weeks, and thanks for watching SF50 Real World Flying.